In the heart of Manhattan's financial district, where glass skyscrapers rose like cold steel giants and the air usually tasted of ambition and relentless pressure, my flower shop was the only place that felt tethered to something alive. To the outside world, I was just Arthur, a soft-spoken, endlessly patient omega florist running an oasis of warmth amidst a desert of concrete. The glass greenhouse was renowned not merely for its rare, meticulously arranged botanicals, but for the immediate visceral shift it demanded of anyone who crossed the threshold. It was a sanctuary of light and fragrance, punctuated by cozy sitting corners I had intentionally designed for the neighborhood's elderly regulars. They were a fixture of my mornings and afternoons, gentle souls who came not always for the blooms, but for somewhere peaceful to rest, talk, and simply be seen. The elders adored me, but none quite as fiercely as Grandma Clair. She visited almost daily, routinely referring to me as my Arthur, with a casual possessiveness that implied I was already a branch on her family tree. Like many of her peers, Claire had taken it upon herself to aggressively nudge fate along. Her grandson is her favorite currency, and she spent months insisting I would be the crowning achievement for him. Over time, my love life became a friendly, highly competitive battlefield of matchmaking debates right in the center of my shop floor, with the neighborhood elders trading arguments over who had the better familial match. Whenever the topic arose, I would offer the same gentle, unyielding refusal. I wasn't holding out for convenience or a secure portfolio or a pleasant arrangement. I was waiting for my mate. It wasn't a posture born of desperation, but of profound, quiet belief. Whenever they pressed, I would speak, perhaps a bit dreamily, about the kind of bond one was looking for. Something instinctive yet tender. A love that required no negotiation, no convincing. A scent that immediately signaled home. The elders would invariably chuckle, waving me off with good-natured dismissals. My grandson would feel like home too, Arthur. But I would only laugh softly and let them enjoy their bickering. Then came the rainy Tuesday night when the rhythm of my quiet life completely shifted. It was long past closing time, but Grandma Claire flatly refused to leave. Her personal driver had been idling at the curb for over an hour, his headlights cutting through the damp Manhattan mist, but Claire sat firmly in one of my velvet armchairs like a stubborn queen on her throne. She made her terms explicitly clear. She would not return home until her eldest grandson arrived to meet the omega she had personally chosen as her future grandson-in-law. According to her, she had no intention of letting competing families snatch me up first. I exhausted every tactic to placate her. I brewed fresh chamomile tea, brought over a small bundle of her favorite sweet peas, and offered endless reassurances, but she refused every single compromise. The shop's main display lights were dimmed, the streets outside had grown quiet, and yet she remained, waiting for destiny to cooperate with her schedule. And then the heavy oak door opened. The physical shift in the room occurred a full second before a silhouette even materialized in the doorway. The scent hit first. It was deep, grounding, and absolutely overwhelming in its raw intensity. A striking combination of storm-soaked cedarwood, crushed pine needles, and a uniquely commanding, warm undertone that demanded submission. I froze mid-step, my breath catching tightly in my throat as my omega instincts surged instantly, blindingly alert. Nicholas Sinclair stepped into the dim light. He was exceptionally tall, impeccably tailored, and wrapped in a controlled aura that didn't just command the room, it anchored it. He looked like the epitome of the city's corporate elite, yet behind that polished exterior, something raw and predatory vibrated beneath the surface. Before logic could bridge the gap, my biology reacted. The true mate bond snapped into place like a violent kinetic force, a golden thread locking between us that felt as though it had been waiting its entire existence for this exact second. We both felt it simultaneously. Mate, the word wasn't spoken aloud. It was a heavy, undeniable truth vibrating deep within our scent glands. A sudden, magnetic pull that made the few feet of flooring between us feel completely unbearable. My knees threatened to give way as Nicholas's gaze locked onto mine. His eyes, a sharp, stormy gray, were initially startled, before slowly unraveling into a profound, heavy recognition he clearly didn't understand yet, but could not deny. In the vacuum of our silence, our scents reacted instinctively. My own scent, the soft, floral sweetness of fresh lilies and warm blossoms, spilled into the air like a calming storm, rushing to meet him. Nicholas's alpha scent flared in response, thick with rain, ancient wood, and an iron-strong protective instinct. It wrapped around my sweetness, not to overpower or stifle, but to claim, anchor, and answer. For a long moment, the entire world muted. The roar of Manhattan, the ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerators. All of it faded until there was nothing left but the invisible bond pulling us together. Grandma Clair, sitting proudly between us like a monarch who had personally orchestrated a cosmic alignment, merely smiled into her teacup and whispered broke the silence. "I told you he would come." Neither Nicholas nor I needed an explanation. The biology of the bond had already done the work for us. Two absolute strangers, one a florist who believed in fate, the other an alpha who had no idea his choice had already been made for him, were now irrevocably bound by instinct, scent, and something far older than human law. For the first time in my life, my belief didn't sound like a romantic dream anymore. It felt like reality had finally arrived. Nicholas turned his head toward his grandmother, his expression a mask of absolute authority that did not entirely hide the tightness in his jaw. The corporate titan had returned for a brief fraction of a second, but his eyes never fully left mine. "Grandmother," Nicholas said, his deep baritone cutting through the thick, scent-heavy air of the shop with quiet command. "Go wait in the car. Arthur and I need a moment alone." Grandma Clair didn't look insulted in the slightest. In fact, she looked absolutely ecstatic. She stood up from the velvet armchair with a speed that defied her age, her eyes twinkling with unmitigated triumph. "Very well, Nicholas," she said gleefully, smoothing down her cashmere coat as she moved toward the door with her cane. But just before she pushed it open, she paused, turning back to look at her grandson with a sharp, knowing glare. "And Nicholas? Make sure you put a ring on his finger. I didn't spend 3 months scheming in this flower shop for you to move slowly." With that final, shameless declaration, she stepped out into the Manhattan mist, leaving the bell above the door chiming softly in her wake. Then there was only us. The silence rushed back in, but it was no longer tense. It was thick, consuming, and deeply intimate. Nicholas shifted his weight, stepping completely into my personal space until the only thing separating us was the worn oak counter. Up close, I could see the silver flecks in his dark gray eyes and the rapid rise and fall of his chest. He was breathing me in, completely unraveled by the sweet, honeyed bloom of my lilies. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand across the counter. It was a massive, capable hand, his long fingers steady despite the primal current humming between us. "Let's start properly," he murmured, his voice dropping into a rough, gravelly register that sent a delicious shiver straight down my spine.
"I'm Nicholas Sinclair."
I looked at his hand, then up into his eyes, my heart hammering against my ribs. I reached out, sliding my smaller palm against his. The moment our skin met, a violent, electric spark shot up my arm, anchoring the bond deep in my chest. My inner Omega sighed, completely turning over its trust to the Alpha standing before me. "Arthur Pendleton," I replied softly, my voice breathless but steady. "I've heard a lot about you, Nicholas. I doubt any of it prepared you for this," he said, his thumb brushing over the back of my knuckles. His grip was firm, holding me like something fragile yet infinitely precious. His scent, storm-soaked cedar and cold, heavy rain, wrapped around me in an instinctive, protective embrace. "I've been waiting for this my entire life," I confessed, refusing to hide behind professional courtesy any longer. I looked directly into his stormy eyes, letting him feel the absolute certainty vibrating through our bond. "I accept you, Nicholas. I accept all of this." A visible wave of relief washed over his sharp features. The rigid tension in his jaw finally dissolved, replaced by a raw, vulnerable softness that I doubted he ever showed the rest of the world. "Thank God," he breathed, a low, rumbling sound of pure alpha satisfaction. He reluctantly let go of my hand, reaching into his tailored overcoat to pull out a sleek black phone. He tapped the screen and slid it across the counter toward me. "Your number, Arthur. Please. If I don't have a way to reach you the moment I leave this shop, I don't think I'll be able to focus on a single thing tomorrow." I smiled, a genuine warm laugh bubbling up from my chest as I took the device. My fingers typed in the digits quickly before sliding it back to him. He immediately saved the contact, staring at my name on his screen as if it were a signed multi-million-dollar contract. Nicholas pocketed the phone, then looked back up at me, his gaze burning with a fierce, quiet intensity. He leaned in just a fraction closer, his scent deepening into something intensely warm, grounding, and completely possessive. "I know this is sudden," Nicholas whispered, his eyes locked onto mine with unwavering sincerity. "I know we are strangers by name, but I want you to know, you are exactly where you belong now, Arthur. I am going to take care of you." It wasn't a demanding vow. It was a soft, sacred declaration. And as I looked at my mate, I knew my dream had finally become my reality. The bell above the door gave one last, fading chime as the street outside reclaimed Grandma Clair, leaving a heavy, ringing quiet in her wake. Nicholas didn't pull back. If anything, the air between us tightened, pulling us closer until the dark wool of his overcoat brushed the polished edge of my counter. "I should let you finish closing," he said, though his hand remained flat on the wood inches from mine. His thumb twitched, a silent giveaway of how much effort it was taking him not to reach out again. "But my feet aren't listening to my brain right now." I let out a soft breath, my heart finally settling into a steady, rhythmic thrum. The initial shock of the bond was fading, replaced by a deep, glowing warmth that made the entire shop feel twice as bright. "You can stay. If you want to help, you can carry that bucket of hydrangeas into the back cooler." A surprised, genuine smile broke through his sharp features, completely erasing the corporate mask he had worn when he first walked in. The CEO of Sinclair Enterprises being put to manual labor within 3 minutes of meeting his mate? "The hydrangeas don't care about your corporate title, Mr. Sinclair," I teased softly, moving out from behind the counter. "They care about fresh water." "Nicholas," he corrected instantly, his eyes tracking me as I walked past him. He didn't hesitate. He stripped off his heavy overcoat, tossing it carelessly over the velvet chair his grandmother had just vacated, and rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white dress shirt. His forearms were thick, veined, and lightly dusted with dark hair, a striking contrast to the delicate stems of the blue flowers he lifted with effortless ease. I led him into the small back room, the air cooler here, smelling sharply of wet earth and clipped stems. As he set the bucket down exactly where I pointed, he turned to face me in the cramped space. The scent of storm-soaked cedarwood and rain became concentrated here, wrapping around me until my lungs were entirely full of him. "Does she do that often?" Nicholas asked, leaning back against a metal wire rack, watching me adjust the humidity settings on the glass cooler. "Hold florists hostage? Only when she's convinced she's saving them from short-sleeved button-downs." I laughed, closing the cooler door and turning to face him. "She really does love you, you know? She talks about you with so much pride. I never imagined she was talking about you. And I never imagined the Omega she was trying to force me to meet was the one I'd spend my whole life looking for," Nicholas murmured. The playfulness left his voice, replaced by that same deep, reverent intensity from before. He stepped forward, closing the small distance between us until I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. "I used to ignore her calls when she started talking about matchmaking. If I had known." "You're here now," I whispered, reaching out instinctively. My fingers brushed the cuff of his rolled-up sleeve. "That's what matters." Nicholas caught my wrist, his grip gentle but entirely unyielding. He didn't pull me closer, but he didn't let go either. Instead, he lifted my hand, pressing his lips softly to the inside of my wrist, right over my pulse point where my scent gland throbbed. A sharp, dizzying wave of pleasure shot straight through me, making my eyelashes flutter. His scent flared, dark, possessive, and fiercely protective, marking me in the quiet safety of the back room. "I'm here," he agreed against my skin, his gray eyes burning into mine as he lowered my hand but kept his fingers intertwined with mine. "And I'm not going anywhere, Arthur. I'm driving you home," Nicholas said, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate as we walked back out into the main room of the shop. He reached for his charcoal overcoat, slipping it back over his broad shoulders, but his eyes never left me. "Nicholas, it's really fine. The subway station is only 2 blocks away," I murmured, turning off the primary grow lights and plunging the shop into a soft, amber twilight. "Absolutely not," he countered, stepping into my path. The sheer authority in his voice was tempered entirely by the fierce, protective warmth bleeding from his scent. "It's dark, it's raining, and your mate is standing right here with a car. Let me take care of you, Arthur." I looked at him, at the rigid, unyielding line of his jaw that softened the moment he caught me looking, and found myself nodding. The truth was, my inner Omega didn't want him to leave either. The thought of stepping out into the cold city air without his grounding presence suddenly felt unbearable. "All right, thank you." After checking the locks one last time, Nicholas grabbed my hand, his large palm engulfing mine, and led me out into the damp Manhattan night. The moment Nicholas opened the back door of the Bentley, Grandma Claire's eyes snapped to us. As we slid into the leather seats, Nicholas didn't let go of my hand. Instead, he pulled my knuckles up to his thigh, resting his broad palm over mine, anchoring me to his side. Claire took one sharp, deep breath of the car's interior, and a look of absolute, unadulterated smugness washed over her face. The air in the vehicle was no longer just expensive leather. It was thick, sweet, and heavy. My lily and blossom scent had completely intertwined with Nicholas's storm-soaked cedar and rain, creating a rich, intoxicating atmosphere that practically screamed claiming. "Well," Claire purred, leaning back against her headrest with the satisfaction of a woman who had just conquered the world. "I see the legal department won't be paying for that parking ticket after all. The air in here is positively delightful." Nicholas ignored her teasing, but his grip on my hand tightened. Throughout the entire drive through the glowing, rain-slicked streets of the city, he never released me. His thumb traced lazy, soothing circles across the back of my hand, his touch electric yet profoundly grounding. Every time the car swung around a corner, his shoulder would press into mine, and his scent would flare, wrapping around me like a physical shield against the frantic city outside. When the Bentley finally pulled up to the curb of my modest apartment building, a sudden wave of reluctance washed over me. I didn't want to step away from him. Nicholas seemed to feel it, too. He turned his body toward me, using his free hand to gently cup the side of my jaw. His thumb brushed over my cheekbone, his stormy gray eyes dark with a quiet, fierce intensity. "I'll call you tomorrow morning," he murmured, his voice a low, private rumble meant only for me. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, but I only leaned forward. Instead of my lips, he pressed a soft, lingering kiss directly against my forehead. The heat of his mouth against my skin sent a rush of pure comfort straight to my core, his scent marking me one last time before I had to leave. "Good night, Arthur." "Good night, Nicholas," I whispered, my cheeks flushing warm. I gave Claire a soft smile, stepped out of the vehicle, and watched the taillights of the Bentley disappear into the dark. Inside the car, the silence lasted only until the vehicle rounded the corner. Nicholas watched the entrance of Arthur's building in the rearview mirror until it was entirely out of sight, his palm still feeling the ghost of Arthur's warmth. "So," Claire sighed loudly from the seat beside him, "am I allowed to say, 'I told you so'? Or are we going to pretend you didn't just look like a man who found a glass of water in the middle of the Sahara?" Nicholas let out a long, ragged breath, the tight corporate guard he usually kept around his grandmother completely shattering. He rubbed a hand over his face, a low chuckle escaping his throat. "You can say whatever you want, grandmother," Nicholas said, turning to look at her with a raw, uncharacteristic vulnerability. "We're mates. The bond snapped the second I walked through that door. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her chest. For all her scheming and matchmaking, hearing the absolute certainty in her grandson's voice struck a chord of genuine, deep emotion. "Mates? Truly? Truly?" Nicholas murmured, looking down at his hand. "He's mine, and I'm never letting him go." The next morning, the glass greenhouse was barely open for an hour before the front bell rang aggressively. I looked up from trimming a shipment of eucalyptus, expecting a customer, but instead found Mrs. Higgins and two other elderly regulars marching into the shop, their faces a mix of intense curiosity and sheer disbelief. Behind them, walking like a queen returning from a successful crusade, was Grandma Clair. "Arthur, darling," Mrs. Higgins burst out, practically leaning over the counter. "Is it true? Claire has been burning up the neighborhood phone lines since 7 this morning. She says her grandson came in last night and the entire shop nearly caught fire from the chemistry." I froze, the pruning shears hovering in midair as my face turned a violent shade of crimson. Claire stepped forward, elegantly leaning on her cane, a look of ultimate triumph radiating from her perfectly made-up face. "Oh, don't look so surprised, Arthur," Claire bragged loudly to the gathering crowd of elders, waving her hand dismissively. "I told all of you weeks ago that my Nicholas was the only alpha fit for our Arthur. And what happened? I sat right in that chair, refused to move, summon my grandson, and destiny did exactly what it was told. They are true mates. I smelled it myself. The Sinclair family ring practically belongs on his finger already. Claire, please." I buried my face in my hands, laughing softly as my scent flared with embarrassment and overwhelming happiness. Before Claire could launch into another theatrical retelling of her matchmaking genius, the phone in my apron pocket buzzed. I pulled it out, and my heart skipped a beat at the text illuminating the screen. "Nicholas, good morning. I hope my grandmother isn't terrorizing your shop yet. I'm counting down the hours until I can see you this evening." Looking at the screen, with the elders bickering happily around me and Claire still loudly taking credit for the universe's design, I couldn't help but smile. I kept my eyes glued to the screen, my thumb tracing over Nicholas's name as a quiet, helpless smile tugged at my lips. "Look at him," Mrs. Higgins crowed, pointing a dramatic finger at my face. "He's glowing. Claire, you old fox, you actually did it." "Of course I did it," Claire huffed smoothly, adjusting her silk scarf with absolute finality. "The Sinclairs do not fail in matters of the heart. Now, Arthur, stop hiding your face behind that eucalyptus." My cheeks burned a deeper shade of crimson. "Claire, please, I have orders to fulfill," I pleaded, though there was no real heat in my voice. I quickly tapped out a reply to Nicholas. "Arthur, good morning. She is currently taking a victory lap in the middle of the shop floor. I think I'll survive until this evening, but only if you promise to shield me from her next scheme." The response came back almost instantly, as if he had been staring at his phone waiting for me. "Nicholas, consider it a binding contract. I'll pick you up at 7. Don't let her bully you into picking out wedding centerpieces just yet." Asterisk. A soft laugh escaped me, which only drew more eager murmurs from the gallery of elders. Thankfully, the morning rush of corporate clients seeking corporate arrangements finally broke up the interrogation, forcing Claire to reluctantly lead her entourage out to find a diner where she could continue her bragging broadcast to anyone who would listen. The rest of the day passed in a surreal, hazy blur. For the first time in my life, the routine of my shop felt different. I wasn't waiting anymore. Every time I brushed against the lilies, I smelled the ghost of storm-soaked cedarwood on my skin. The bond was a quiet, steady hum in the back of my mind, a comforting weight that made the chaos of Manhattan feel entirely distant. By 6:45 p.m., the shop was dark, the floors were swept, and I was standing in front of the small mirror in the back room, nervously smoothing down the front of my knitted sweater. I had changed out of my work apron, but I still felt like I smelled of soil and rosewater. I worried, just for a fleeting second, if a polished alpha like Nicholas would find me too simple once the initial shock of the bond wore off. At exactly 7 o'clock, The bell above the door chimed. My breath hitched. I walked out into the dim main room, and there he was. Nicholas had traded his sharp corporate suit for a dark cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, though he still wore the heavy charcoal overcoat. The moment our eyes met, that golden thread in my chest tightened, sending a wave of pure, unadulterated relief through my veins. The corporate stiffness he usually carried was completely absent. His expression was raw, hungry, and entirely focused on me. "You're on time," I said softly, stepping out from behind the counter. "I've been sitting in my car around the corner since 6:30, Nicholas confessed, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that made my knees weak. He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides, his scent, thick with rain and deep wood, instinctively expanding to wrap around me. I promised myself I wouldn't rush you, but my patience ran out. He reached out, his large hands anchoring gently on my waist. The physical contact was an absolute jolt, making my eyelids heavy as my omega instincts sighed in total surrender. He leaned down, burying his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply right over my scent gland. A ragged, heavy breath escaped him, his grip tightening just a fraction. "God, Arthur, you smell incredible. I couldn't think straight all day." "Neither could I whispered, wrapping my arms around his broad shoulders, burying my face in the warmth of his chest. "Your grandmother made sure of that." Nicholas let out a low chuckle against my skin, the vibration rumbling directly into my chest. He pulled back just enough to look down at me, his stormy gray eyes soft with an intensity that felt entirely safe. "I told her if she interfered one more time, I'd ban her from the rehearsal dinner." I smiled, looking up at him. "The rehearsal dinner? Isn't it a bit early for that?" Nicholas's thumb traced the line of my jaw, his gaze dropping to my lips before rising back to meet my eyes with absolute, unyielding certainty. "Arthur," he murmured, his voice laced with a soft, sacred gravity. "The moment I walked through that door last night, my life stopped being just mine. It's ours. There is no such thing as too early anymore." Nicholas didn't wait for me to answer. He simply kept his hand flat against the small of my back, guiding me out of the shop and into the cool, rain-slicked Manhattan evening. The Bentley was gone, replaced by a sleek, midnight black SUV. Nicholas opened the passenger door for me himself, his hand lingering on my waist until I was safely inside, wrapped in the rich leather interior that already smelled faintly of him. "Where are we going?" I asked as he climbed into the driver's seat, his massive frame instantly making the spacious cabin feel intimate. "If it's anywhere with a dress code, I might be severely underdressed." Nicholas glanced over at me, his stormy gray eyes softening as they swept over my knitted sweater. "You look perfect, and we're going somewhere private. I didn't want to share you with a crowded dining room tonight." He drove with one hand on the steering wheel, his other hand immediately finding mine across the center console. Our fingers laced together naturally, his thumb resuming that slow, hypnotic rhythm against the back of my hand. The city blurred past the windows, a chaotic sea of yellow cabs and neon lights, but inside the car, the air was thick, quiet, and heavy with the undeniable harmony of our scents. 20 minutes later, the SUV pulled into the underground garage of a secure, high-end residential building overlooking the East River. Nicholas led me up a private elevator that opened directly into his penthouse. The space was exactly what I expected of Nicholas Sinclair, minimalist, grand, and structured with sharp architectural lines. Yet, the moment the door closed behind us, the entire apartment felt intensely warm. A fire was already crackling in the hearth, and a table near the floor-to-ceiling windows was set for two, looking out over the glittering expanse of the river. "I had my personal chef prepare everything before we arrived and leave," Nicholas murmured, taking my coat and draping it carefully over the entryway rack. "It's just us." The dinner was a quiet, effortless blur of low conversation and shared smiles. We talked about everything and nothing, how I had started the glass greenhouse after leaving a stifling corporate job, and how he had spent his entire 20s building a wall around himself to survive the pressure of the Sinclair legacy. With every story shared, The golden thread between us tightened. He was a man used to commanding boards and dictating terms, yet with me he was endlessly patient, listening to the minor details of my life as if they were sacred texts. But as the plates were cleared and the fire burned down to a deep, smoldering amber, the polite boundaries of a first date began to wear thin. The primal pull of the bond, which we had both been politely managing over dinner, became absolute. Nicholas stood up, offering me his hand. I took it without hesitation. He pulled me up from the table, but instead of leading me back to the sofa, he stepped directly into my space, backing me up until my hips nudged against the sturdy edge of the dark wood table. His scent flared, a sudden, intoxicating rush of storm-soaked wood and pure, possessive alpha heat. My breath hitched, my lilies blooming in response, filling the room with a sweet, desperate invitation. "Arthur?" Nicholas rasped, his voice dropping into a dangerous, gravelly register. His hands came up, his large palms cupping my jawline, his fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of my neck. He tilted my head up, forcing me to look directly into eyes that had darkened to a stormy, nearly black gray. "I've been holding back all night. If I don't kiss you right now, I'm going to lose my mind." "Don't hold back," I whispered, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I reached up, my hands gripping the fabric of his dark sweater, anchoring myself to him. "Please, Nicholas." The final thread of his corporate control snapped. Nicholas leaned down and captured my mouth. The kiss wasn't gentle, but it wasn't cruel. It was a desperate, consuming reclamation. The moment his lips crashed against mine, a physical shockwave tore through the bond, vibrating straight down to my core. A soft, breathless whimper broke from the back of my throat, and Nicholas drank it in, his tongue sweeping past my lips to claim me completely. The sheer heat of him was overwhelming. His grip on my jaw tightened, holding me steady as he tilted my head to deepen the kiss, his mouth moving over mine with a fierce, possessive hunger that made my knees completely buckle. If his hands hadn't immediately dropped to my waist, lifting me slightly against the edge of the table, I would have collapsed onto the floor. Every instinct in my omega biology roared with satisfaction. His alpha scent wrapped around me like a heavy, protective blanket, marking me from the inside out. I tangled my fingers in his thick, dark hair, pulling him closer, desperate to erase the agonizing fractions of an inch left between us. The kiss became deeper, wetter, a rhythmic, intoxicating exchange that tasted of wine, rain, and the ancient, unyielding promise of the universe. When he finally pulled back, it was only by a fraction of an inch. His forehead rested against mine, his chest heaving as he drew in ragged, heavy breaths of my scent. His lips were wet and flushed, his gray eyes burning with a raw, primal devotion that belonged entirely to me. "Mine?" Nicholas rumbled, the word vibrating directly from his chest into mine. A fierce, low growl of absolute certainty. I leaned my head back against his shoulder, my lips tingling and my mind completely spun by the intensity of him. I took a deep, shaky breath of his cedarwood scent, wrapping my arms tightly around his neck. "Yours?" I agreed softly, pressing a small, lingering kiss to the warm skin of his throat. "Always." For a long time, the only sound in the penthouse was the quiet hiss of the dying fire and the ragged, synchronized rhythm of our breathing. Nicholas kept his arms locked around my waist, his massive frame completely shielding me from the rest of the cold Manhattan skyline glowing outside the glass. I could feel the thunderous hammer of his heartbeat against my chest, a physical echo of the bond that was currently cementing itself into every fiber of our being. Slowly, his hands shifted, his large palms sliding down to rest flat against my lower back, grounding me as my breathing finally began to level out. He didn't pull away entirely. Instead, he began pressing soft, deliberate, burning kisses along the line of my jaw, moving with a reverence that made my eyes flutter shut all over again. "I didn't think it was possible to feel like this," Nicholas murmured against my skin, his deep voice carrying a raw, unvarnished vulnerability that contrasted sharply with his powerful stance. To look at someone and know, without a single shred of doubt, that my entire universe begins and ends with them. I tilted my head back, letting my fingers trace the hard line of his collarbone beneath his dark sweater. You spent your whole life building walls, Nicholas. It's okay to let them come down. They didn't just come down, Arthur, he corrected softly, lifting his head to look down at me. His gray eyes were clear now, the fierce, predatory darkness of the initial claiming melting into a profound, heavy tenderness. The moment I stepped into your shop, you turned them to dust. He reached over and gently took my hand, lifting it up between us. Our fingers were still laced, but this time, he looked down at them with a quiet, intense focus. With his thumb, he traced the empty base of my ring finger, his eyes darkening with a sudden, purposeful memory. A small, breathless laugh escaped me. Are you thinking about what Grandma Claire said? Nicholas's lips twitched into a devastatingly handsome, wicked smile. My grandmother is a menace to society, but she isn't wrong about everything. I've never been a man who moves slowly when I know exactly what I want. And I want everything with you, Arthur. A home, a life, a family. Every single morning and every single night. My heart swelled. A sweet, intense wave of my lily scent blooming into the room in response to his words. I'm not going anywhere, Nicholas. You don't have to rush to lock me down. I am already completely yours. Good, he rumbled, his chest expanding with deep alpha satisfaction. He leaned down, pressing one more lingering, sweet kiss to the corner of my mouth before reluctantly loosening his grip on my waist. Because I intend to court you properly, starting by making sure you actually get some rest tonight. Come on, I'm taking you home. The drive back to my apartment was entirely different from the first night. The frantic tension of the unknown had completely dissolved, replaced by a deep, comfortable certainty. Nicholas kept his right hand firmly clamped over mine the entire way, his thumb stroking my knuckles while the soft jazz from the car radio filled the space between us. When he pulled up to my curb, he didn't just let me step out. He turned off the engine, walked around to my side, and opened the door, guiding me up the steps of my building until we were standing right outside my apartment door. Call me the second you wake up tomorrow, Nicholas commanded softly, his hands coming up to cup my face one last time. I have a meeting at 8, but I'll drop by the shop right after. I'll call you, I promised, leaning up on my tiptoes to press a soft, affectionate kiss to his lips. Good night, Nicholas. Good night, my beautiful Omega, he whispered, his scent wrapping around me like a physical promise before he finally turned to walk down the hall. The next morning, the sun had barely risen over the city when my phone began to buzz furiously on my nightstand. I groaned, blinking the sleep from my eyes, and picked it up, expecting it to be Nicholas. Instead, the screen was flooded with a flurry of text messages from Grandma Claire, accompanied by a picture. I unlocked the phone and clicked on the image. It was a photograph of a massive, undeniably expensive arrangement of white orchids and deep blue delphiniums, sitting prominently on the front desk of Sinclair Enterprises. A text below it read, "Darling, this is Grandma Claire. I had the driver drop me off at Nicholas's office building this morning just to see his face. The boy walked into his executive board meeting wearing a grin so wide his secretary thought he was having a medical emergency. He smells so heavily of your lilies that the entire top floor practically looks like a meadow. I told the head of accounting that they need to start preparing the catering budget for a spring wedding. You've thoroughly ruined my grandson, dear, and I couldn't be prouder. See you this afternoon." I dropped the phone back onto the mattress, burying my face in my pillow as a loud, helpless laugh bubbled up from my chest. My face was burning, my inner Omega absolutely preening with joy. Before I could even think of how to reply to his grandmother, the phone buzzed again. This time it was a direct text from Nicholas. "Nicholas, I am going to confiscate my grandmother's phone permanently. Please ignore whatever she just sent you. I love you, Arthur. See you in a few hours." I rolled over, looking out the window at the bright morning light catching on the glass skyscrapers of the city. For the first time in my life, Manhattan didn't look cold or imposing anymore. It looked like the place where my destiny had finally begun. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the morning rush of corporate executives had cleared out, but the glass greenhouse was far from quiet. In fact, it was packed. Word of Grandma Claire's morning broadcast had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, and half the local elders had materialized in my shop under the guise of browsing the new ferns. Mrs. Higgins was sitting in the velvet armchair, holding court with Mr. Abernathy from the bakery next door, while two other regulars stood near the hydrangeas, all of them casting expectant glances toward the front door every time the wind rustled the awning outside. Because Claire has announced to them earlier that her grandson is definitely coming. "Arthur, sweetheart," Mrs. Higgins called out, peering over her reading glasses at me as I meticulously trimmed the thorns off a fresh delivery of red roses. "Are you quite certain?" he said right after his meeting? "This past 3. A powerful alpha like that has a lot of corporations to crush before tea time, you know." "He'll be here, Martha," Mr. Abernathy chided, waving a hand dismissively. "Did you not hear Claire?" The boy was practically floating through his boardroom. "You can't fight a true mate bond. He's probably speeding through traffic right now." I could only shake my head, a helpless, exasperated smile tugging at my lips as my cheeks burned a steady, warm pink. "Please, everyone, he's just dropping by. You're going to frighten him away before he even crosses the threshold." The bell above the door chimed, and the light in the shop instantly shifted. The ambient scent of damp soil and clipped stems parted like a curtain as a massive, commanding presence stepped inside. The scent hit me first, hitting my system with the familiar, intoxicating rush of a thunderstorm rolling over deep woods, storm-soaked cedar, crisp rain, and that heavy, protective alpha warmth that belonged strictly to me. My inner omega immediately perked up, a quiet, satisfied sigh vibrating in my chest as my own lily scent bloomed into the room in an instinctive, joyous greeting. Nicholas stepped into the shop. He was back in his element, dressed in a flawless, bespoke charcoal 3-piece suit that screamed power and old Manhattan wealth. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his jaw was set with the rigid, unyielding discipline of a man who spent his days commanding rooms. He looked every bit the unapproachable, cold corporate titan the financial journals loved to write about, until his stormy gray eyes locked onto me behind the counter. The transformation was instantaneous. The sharp, unreadable line of his mouth softened, and the rigid tension in his broad shoulders completely vanished. A raw, devastatingly handsome warmth broke across his features, his gaze burning with a fierce, quiet intensity that made the rest of the crowded shop disappear. A collective, theatrical gasp echoed from the elderly gallery, but Nicholas didn't even blink. He didn't care about the audience. He moved with a heavy, purposeful stride, crossing the hardwood floor in seconds until he was standing directly on the other side of my counter. "Nicholas," I breathed, setting my pruning shears down with trembling fingers. "You're here. I told you I would be," he murmured, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that sent a delicious shiver straight down my spine. He didn't wait for professional pleasantries. Nicholas reached across the worn oak wood, his large, capable hands coming up to gently frame my face. His thumbs brushed over my flushing cheekbones, his touch electric and profoundly grounding. He leaned over the counter, tilting his head slightly, and captured my mouth in a deep, lingering kiss. The kiss wasn't the desperate, consuming storm of the night before, but a soft, possessive claim meant to establish reality in the light of day. His lips were warm and firm against mine, moving with a slow, deliberate reverence that completely stole the air from my lungs. His alpha scent flared, thick and heavy, wrapping around me like a physical shield, marking me in front of the entire room as his. From the corner of the shop, Mrs. Higgins let out a dramatic, delighted fangirl squeak, and Mr. Abernathy chuckled loudly. When Nicholas finally pulled back, just an inch, his gray eyes were dark with a quiet, fierce devotion. He pressed his forehead against mine for a brief second, inhaling the sweet, honeyed scent of my lilies before letting his hands slide down to anchor firmly on the counter, centimeters from my own. "Good afternoon, Arthur," he whispered, a brilliant, breathtaking smile finally breaking through his sharp features. "Good afternoon," I replied, my voice breathless and entirely unraveled, my heart hammering a frantic, happy rhythm against my ribs. I looked past his shoulder at the grinning faces of the neighborhood elders. "I see you brought the thunderstorm with you." Nicholas glanced over his shoulder at the audience, his smile turning slightly wicked as he kept his body firmly angled toward me. "I had to ensure my grandmother hadn't completely mobilized a wedding planning committee in your workspace." The 3 months that followed our first date smoothed out into a routine that felt less like a new relationship and more like a long overdue alignment. The frantic, unyielding pace of Manhattan's financial district didn't slow down, but its trajectory changed completely. Every single loop of Nicholas's day began and ended at the glass greenhouse. Our mornings always started the same way. At precisely 7:30, before the concrete canyon outside fully woke up, a sleek black SUV would idle at the curb. Nicholas would step inside, carrying the crisp scent of the morning air and a fresh cup of coffee for me. Without fail, the corporate titan, the man who controlled Sinclair Enterprises, would immediately strip off his heavy, hand-tailored suit jacket, drape it over my velvet armchair, and roll his sleeves up past his forearms. The shipment from the Dutch markets just arrived, I told him one Tuesday morning, leaning against the counter as he carried in a massive, dripping crate of blue hydrangeas. "You don't have to carry those, Nicholas. Your shirt is going to get ruined." "Let it," he rumbled, his deep baritone cutting through the quiet hum of the shop. He set the heavy crate down exactly where I needed it, his large, veined forearms lightly dusted with water droplets. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand and looked at me, his stormy gray eyes melting into that fierce, quiet warmth that was reserved strictly for me. "I spent 10 years managing spreadsheets, Arthur. This is the first time in my life I've actually felt useful before 9 a.m. It didn't take long for the neighborhood elders to treat him less like a mythical billionaire and more like an honorary member of our community. Within a month, Grandma Claire had mobilized her entire social circle to turn my shop into their daily headquarters. On Friday afternoons, the shop floor looked more like a country club lounge. Mrs. Higgins would be perched in the corner, holding court with Mr. Abernathy, while Grandma Claire sat in her favorite velvet chair like a queen observing her court. "Nicholas, darling," Claire called out one afternoon, waving her cane toward a high shelf of hanging ferns while Nicholas was in the middle of checking his corporate email on his phone. "Be a dear and reach that Boston fern for me. My arthritis is acting up, and Arthur is much too delicate to be climbing ladders today." Nicholas didn't even blink. He quietly pocketed his phone, walked over, and effortlessly lifted the heavy clay pot down, presenting it to her with a perfectly straight face. "Is this satisfactory, grandmother? Or should I arrange for my legal team to draft a transfer of ownership for the plant?" "Oh, don't be facetious," Claire scoffed gleefully, though her eyes twinkled with absolute triumph as she looked at Mrs. Higgins. "You see that, Martha? Impeccable breeding. I told you he knew how to take direction." But while the shop belonged to the elders during the day, the nights belonged entirely to us. Our dates became a sanctuary. Nicholas was a man used to public scrutiny, but with me he sought absolute privacy. Sometimes he would take me to small, hidden restaurants in the village where the lighting was dim and the tables were tucked away in brick corners. Other nights, we stayed in his penthouse, looking out over the glittering expanse of the East River while the fire crackled in the hearth. During those quiet evenings, the polished exterior he presented to the world would completely dissolve. We would sit on the floor by the fireplace, my head resting against his broad shoulder, his large hand enveloped over mine. We talked about everything: how I had built the shop as a refuge after my parents passed, and how he had spent his entire life wearing a heavy armor of responsibility to protect the Sinclair name. "I used to think the scent of this city was just exhaust and concrete," Nicholas murmured one night, his fingers tracing lazy, soothing circles across the back of my hand. He leaned down, burying his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply. His scent, storm-soaked cedar and heavy rain, flared softly, wrapping around me like a physical blanket. But now, every time I smell lilies, My chest clears. You've ruined me for the boardroom, Arthur. You seem to be managing just fine, I teased softly, twisting around to look up at him. Your secretary told Claire that you actually smiled during a budget review last week. She thought you were replacing the executive board. Nicholas let out a low, rumbling chuckle that vibrated directly against my ribs. I was thinking about how quickly I could wrap up the meeting to get back to you. He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a sweet, lingering kiss that tasted of red wine and pure, unadulterated devotion. Yet, beneath the comfortable rhythm of our courtship, an undeniable tension was building. The golden thread connecting our chests had grown thick, heavy, and desperately hungry. Every time our hands brushed, every time his scent flared in response to my presentation, our biology pushed us closer to the edge. We were moving carefully, respecting the space we were building, but our inner instincts were reaching a breaking point. The invisible boundaries we had set up were fracturing, and we both knew that the summer wouldn't end before the bond demanded to be sealed. The separation was an agonizing, visceral ache that neither of us had been fully prepared for. Nicholas had to fly to Tokyo for a critical 2-week merger, a massive, multi-billion-dollar acquisition that required his physical presence to close. Because our bond hadn't been sealed with a mark yet, the distance felt less like a geographic separation and more like a limb being slowly torn from my body. Without his grounding scent of storm-soaked cedarwood and rain filling the air, the glass greenhouse felt cold. The lilies smelled faint, and my own pheromones turned sour and anxious, curling tightly around me like a shield. I couldn't sleep. My inner Omega spent the nights pacing the apartment, mourning the absence of our unformed tether. Nicholas called me 3 times a day, his voice rough and strained through the phone, sounding just as unraveled as I felt. He told me his executive board thought he was losing his mind because he kept checking his watch, calculating the time difference just to hear me breathe. By the 13th day, the agony had peaked. Nicholas wasn't due back until the following evening, and I was running on pure exhaustion. I stood in the center of the shop with a mop in my hands, moving it lethargically across the hardwood floor. My eyes were fixed on the glass door, staring blankly out at the gray Manhattan drizzle. I felt hollowed out, a heavy lump permanently wedged in my throat. Over in the velvet-sitting corner, a quiet, solemn assembly of elders watched me. The usual cheerful matchmaking debates and teasing banter had completely died down over the last fortnight. They looked at me with deep, maternal sorrow. "Oh, look at him," Mrs. Higgins whispered loudly to Mr. Abernathy, her voice thick with pity. "It seems like our Arthur is about to cry at any moment from now. The poor lamb looks completely translucent. The boy hasn't touched his chamomile all morning," Mr. Abernathy muttered back, shaking his head. "That grandson of yours better be flying supersonic, Claire. This is agonizing to watch." Grandma Claire didn't offer her usual smug retort. She just stared at me, her expression soft and genuinely worried, her manicured hand resting heavily on her cane. "He lands tomorrow at 6, Arthur, darling," she called out gently, trying to offer comfort. "Just one more day." I tried to force a smile, but my lips trembled so violently I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from sobbing right there in front of them.
I'm fine, Claire.
Just counting down the hours. But fate, it seemed, was entirely done making us wait. The next evening arrived, heavy and thick with a looming summer thunderstorm. The elders had left early, sensing my desperate need for quiet, and the shop was completely empty. The primary grow lights were turned off, plunging the space into a dark, amber twilight. I stood by the counter, wiping it down for the 20th time, my heart hammering against my ribs because his plane should have touched down an hour ago. Suddenly, the air in the shop didn't just change. It shattered. The scent hit first, bursting through the seams of the door before it even swung open. Storm-soaked cedarwood, pure electric rain, intense, protective, and heavily possessive alpha heat. It rushed into the shop like a tidal wave, instantly obliterating the anxious, sour smell of my loneliness. My Omega instincts roared to life, a blinding wave of relief crashing through my veins so hard my knees literally gave out. I caught myself on the edge of the counter just as the bell above the door rattled violently. Nicholas stepped inside. He didn't look like the polished CEO who had left 2 weeks ago. His hair was completely disheveled. His tie was loosened, and his charcoal suit jacket was slung carelessly over his arm. He looked feral. His stormy gray eyes were blown wide, his nostrils flaring as he desperately drank in the sweet, honeyed scent of my lilies blooming in a chaotic, joyful rush to meet him. "Arthur," he rasped, his voice a raw, gravelly broken sound. I didn't care about professional boundaries or the counter between us. I practically threw myself around the partition. The moment I reached him, I slammed into his chest, burying my face into the hollow of his neck, where his scent gland throbbed with pure, unadulterated alpha dominance. Nicholas let out a ragged, choked sound, his large arms instantly wrapping around my waist with a force that lifted me completely off my feet. He crushed me against him, pinning me to his massive frame as if he were trying to pull me beneath his very skin. "I'm not letting you go," I sobbed into his skin, my hands clawing desperately at the fabric of his shirt. "Nicholas, don't leave me again. Please, I can't do it. I can't breathe without you. Never again. I swear to God, never again," he vowed fiercely, his chest heaving as he rocked me in the middle of the empty shop. He buried his face in my hair, his body trembling with the sheer weight of his own agony ending. They tried to keep me for a final dinner. I left the acquisition papers on the table and walked out. I couldn't survive another hour, Arthur. Not one more hour. He didn't even let me put my shoes on properly or grab my coat. He carried me out to his SUV, molding me to his side in the passenger seat, his right hand gripping mine so tight our bones practically cracked. The drive to his penthouse was a blur of rain-slicked neon lights and roaring engines. Neither of us spoke, the air inside the cabin entirely choked with our thick, desperate, mating pheromones. The moment the private elevator doors opened into his penthouse, the remaining fabric of our civility tore completely. Nicholas dragged me into his arms before the doors could even slide shut. "I love you," he murmured against my mouth, his lips crashing down onto mine in a fierce, bruising reclamation. "I love you, Arthur. I am entirely yours. I've been a dead man walking for 14 days. I love you, Nicholas. I love you," I cried into the kiss, tasting the salt of my own tears as he carried me down the dark hallway, kicking his bedroom door open. We shed our clothes in a frantic, chaotic frenzy on the edge of the mattress. Suit pants, linen shirts, and knitted wool were ripped away until we were completely bare, illuminated only by the violent flashes of lightning outside the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. When he slid between my thighs, the sheer, agonizing relief of his weight hovering over me made me arch off the sheets with a loud gasp. He guided himself into me slowly, a thick, dragging friction that stretched my aching body, filling the hollow void that had been torturing me for 2 weeks. I screamed his name into the dark, my legs locking tightly around his waist as he began to drive into me. The pace was ruthless, a relentless, rhythmic heat that drove all coherent thought from my mind. Every deep, unyielding thrust sent a wave of electric pleasure crashing straight to my core, shattering me completely. Nicholas was entirely undone, his muscles taut and slick with sweat under the jagged purple lightning, his gray eyes burning with a raw, predatory hunger that belonged strictly to me. He anchored his large hands beneath my hips, lifting me higher, driving deeper, matching the frantic rhythm of the thunderstorm outside. "Arthur, look at me," he commanded, his voice a low, terrifyingly beautiful alpha growl as the primal tension reached its absolute peak. He pinned my wrists above my head, his large hands securing both of my damp palms against the pillows. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, his hot breath scalding the sensitive skin directly over my swollen, throbbing scent gland. "No more space between us. I need to mark you. Now. Yes, please, Nicholas, mark me. Make me yours forever," I screamed, arching my neck, pressing my pulsing throat firmly against his mouth. Nicholas opened his mouth, his tongue damply tracing the exact spot where my pulse beat loudest before his alpha canines elongated. With a sudden, deliberate pressure, he bit down. A sharp, blinding white flash of pain shot through my entire system, causing my eyes to snap wide as a choked cry tore from my throat. But the pain lasted only a fraction of a second. As his teeth pierced deep into the gland, injecting his unique alpha venom into my bloodstream, a wave of liquid fire erupted through my veins. The golden thread in my chest didn't just tighten. It fused, melting into a heavy, unbreakable iron chain that locked our souls together for eternity. At the exact moment the bond sealed, the overwhelming rush triggered a cataclysmic release that left me completely undone. Nicholas roared against my skin, his own body locking tight as he filled me, his knots swelling instantly to anchor us together as one entity. Driven by the shared, blinding current of the newly sealed bond, a fierce, protective instinct flared inside my own chest. My inner Omega demanded to claim him back. I wrapped my arms tightly around his neck, pulling his broad shoulder down to my mouth. With pure instinct guiding my jaws, I pressed my teeth against the thick muscle where his neck met his shoulder and bit down firmly. Nicholas let out a sharp, ragged breath, his body shuddering violently as I broke the skin, marking him with the unique, fierce seal of an Omega's claim. His scent flared in response, roaring with profound, eternal satisfaction. We stayed locked together in the dark, our teeth sinking into one another, our heartbeats perfectly synchronized as the storm outside raged against the glass. When he finally, slowly detached his teeth, he leaned down to gently lick over the bleeding puncture marks on my neck, his soothing saliva instantly numbing the ache and sealing the wound into a permanent, beautiful mating mark. Nicholas collapsed beside me as the knots slowly subsided, pulling my pliant, exhausted body tightly against his chest. He tucked my head securely under his chin, his large hand smoothing down my hair in long, sweeping motions, his chest still heaving as his alpha scent settled into a deep, fiercely protective purr. I pressed my face into the warm hollow of his throat, looking at the matching mark on his shoulder, breathing in the scent of cedar and rain that was now permanently woven into my own skin. The distance was gone. The agony was over. I was finally permanently home. The next morning, the bedroom was flooded with the soft, golden light of a washed-clean Manhattan sky. The storm had passed, leaving behind a brilliant clarity that mirrored the profound stillness in my chest. I woke up slow, wrapped in warmth so absolute it felt like a physical weight. Nicholas was completely tangled around me, one of his heavy thighs hooked over mine and his massive arm anchored firmly across my waist, pinning me to his chest. Every time I took a breath, my lungs filled with the scent of storm-soaked cedarwood and rain, but it wasn't just coming from the room anymore. It was coming from me. I shifted slightly, and the movement caused a low, deep rumble to vibrate against my back. Nicholas pulled me tighter against him without even opening his eyes, his nose burying deep into the crook of my neck, right over the raw, swollen mating mark. A sharp, delicious wave of pure, unadulterated affection surged through the bond, washing over my mind so clearly it took my breath away. It wasn't my emotion, it was his. The unsealed, fragile thread we had managed for months had completely dissolved, replaced by a massive, inseparable tether that allowed me to feel the exact weight of his devotion. He loved me with a quiet, terrifying intensity that required no words, no explanations. "Arthur," he rasped, his voice thick with sleep, his baritone sending a comforting shiver straight down my spine. His eyes opened, the stormy gray clear and incredibly soft as he looked down at me. "Are you in pain?" "No," I whispered, reaching up to trace the heavy, purple-red mark my own teeth had left on his broad shoulder the night before. "I feel perfect. I feel whole." Nicholas's gaze darkened with a fierce, possessive satisfaction. He leaned down, pressing his lips to the fresh mark on my neck with an aching gentleness, his tongue lightly soothing the sensitive skin before he kissed my lips, taste-testing the sweet lily fragrance that was now irrevocably bound to his own. We didn't want to move. The sheer pull of the inseparable bond made the concept of space feel entirely foreign. Even when we finally forced ourselves out of bed hours later, the distance between us never exceeded a few inches. Nicholas held my hand as we made coffee. He kept his palm flattened against the small of my back as I dressed in a soft, oversized sweater. We were glued together, two parts of a single organism that had finally been welded into place. By the time we arrived at the glass greenhouse later that afternoon, I was practically floating. Nicholas didn't leave my side, walking into the shop right behind me. His large hand firmly laced through mine, his fingers overlapping my knuckles with an unyielding grip. The front bell gave a sharp, cheerful chime. The shop was already occupied. Mrs. Higgins, Mr. Abernathy, and 3 other neighborhood regulars were hovering near the counter. But the moment the door swung open, all conversation died instantly. The air in the shop didn't just fill with our arrival. It was completely conquered by it. The frantic, anxious smell of my loneliness from the previous 2 weeks was entirely gone. In its place was a thick, rich, and utterly intoxicating harmony. My sweet, honeyed lily scent was completely intertwined with Nicholas's deep cedar and heavy rain, creating an unmistakable, heavy atmosphere of an established, fully claimed pair. It was a sensory announcement that left absolutely no room for doubt. Mrs. Higgins gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes darting straight to the side of my neck where the prominent, dark purple mating mark peeked through the collar of my sweater. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and absolute delight. "Look at them. They did it," Mr. Abernathy muttered, a massive, proud grin breaking across his wrinkled face as he nudged the baker next to him. "The boy didn't even wait for the weekend. Look at that scent alignment. It's a perfect match." From the velvet armchair by the window, a slow, elegant rustle of cashmere broke the stunned silence. Grandma Clair stood up. She leaned heavily on her cane, her silver hair perfectly styled, but for the first time, her usual theatrical, teasing facade was entirely absent. She took a deep, deliberate breath of the shop's air, her sharp eyes scanning the matching marks on our necks, tracking the way Nicholas's broad shoulder was locked firmly against mine, his protective aura completely enveloping me. A look of profound, genuine emotion softened her sharp features. Her eyes shone with a sudden, rare film of tears as a beautiful, proud smile spread across her face. "Well," Claire said, her voice unusually soft, though it carried clearly across the quiet flora. She walked over to us, her hand reaching out to gently touch Nicholas's arm, right below his marked shoulder, before looking at me. "I see the universe finally listened to common sense. My Arthur is officially my Arthur." Nicholas didn't let go of my hand, but he leaned down, pressing a rare, respectful kiss to his grandmother's cheek. "Thank you, grandmother," he murmured, his deep voice thick with sincerity, "for staying in the shop." Claire huffed, wiping a stray tear from her cheek with a manicured thumb, though her triumphant, bragging spirit returned in a flash as she looked back at the gathering of elders. "Did I not tell you all? 3 months ago, I told you my Nicholas would feel like home. And look at them now. The entire financial district is going to smell like a greenhouse by tomorrow morning, and I intend to take every single bit of the credit." The shop erupted into happy chatter and congratulations, but as Nicholas pulled me slightly closer, his thumb tracing a slow, grounding circle on the back of my hand, the noise faded into background static. I looked up into his gray eyes, smelling the storm and the lilies, and knew that no matter how loud the world outside became, the sanctuary we had built would never fade. The months that followed the sealing of our bond moved with a rich, cinematic warmth. True to her word, Grandma Claire threw herself into orchestrating our wedding with the precision of a seasoned general. She monopolized every detail, from the thousands of imported white roses that turned the cathedral into an extension of my shop, to the guest list that merged Manhattan's elite with every single regular from the neighborhood block. Nicholas and I simply let her ride her wave of absolute triumph. After the ceremony, I packed up my modest apartment and moved into his penthouse overlooking the river, our scents permanently woven into the very plaster of the walls. But the true shift in our universe happened on a crisp Tuesday morning in early spring. I was standing behind the counter of the shop, arranging a bundle of delicate baby's breath, when a sudden wave of dizziness washed over me, accompanied by a strange, sweet ache deep in my core. My inner Omega didn't panic. Instead, it cooed, a soft, purring wave of absolute contentment spreading through my body. When Nicholas arrived 45 minutes later to help with the morning shipment, he didn't even make it past the door before he dropped the crate of orchids he was holding. His nostrils flared, his stormy gray eyes blowing wide as his alpha scent expanded in a fierce, sudden burst of pure, possessive instinct. He crossed the floor in a single stride, pulling me over the counter and burying his face in my neck. Our scents had shifted. The sweet lily and storm-soaked cedar had melded into something new, thick, warm, and distinctly milky, like sun-warmed honey. "Arthur?" Nicholas had rasped, his large hands trembling against my stomach, his voice thick with a sudden, overwhelming emotion. "I am," I whispered, tears pricking my eyes as I locked my fingers behind his neck. "We are." The pregnancy was a communal affair. The penthouse was constantly filled with the scent of pine, rain, and the rich, protective layer of Nicholas's nesting instincts. But the glass greenhouse became the true cradle for our growing family. The elders formed a protective human shield around me. Mr. Abernathy brought fresh pastries daily to combat my morning sickness. Mrs. Higgins knitted enough blankets to stock a boutique, and Claire routinely arrived with catalogs of handmade cribs, proudly declaring that a Sinclair heir deserved nothing less than solid mahogany. When the snow began to fall over the city in late December, our son arrived. The labor was a fierce, exhausting storm, but Nicholas never left my side, his grounding scent holding me steady through every contraction. His hand anchored in mine until a sharp, healthy cry echoed through the delivery room. They placed our son on my chest, a beautiful, healthy little alpha with a tuft of dark hair and his father's striking gray eyes. Nicholas wept openly, pressing his lips to my sweaty forehead, his scent roaring with a fierce, eternal devotion as he wrapped his arms around the both of us. We named him Liam. 3 weeks later, I brought Liam to the shop for the very first time. The winter wind was howling outside, but inside, the grow lights were bright, the air was warm, and the entire regular crew was already waiting in the velvet sitting corner, practically vibrating with anticipation. The moment Nicholas and I walked in, carrying the bundle of soft blue blankets, a collective gasp rippled through the room. "Oh, give him to me. Give him to me this instant," Grandma Claire demanded, stepping forward with her cane, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. Nicholas smiled softly, carefully transferring our sleeping son into his grandmother's waiting arms. Claire looked down at Liam, her sharp features melting into a look of such profound, tender adoration that her eyes instantly welled with tears. "Look at him," she whispered proudly, her voice cracking as she cradled him like a prize she had personally won. "He has the Sinclair jawline. Impeccable." From there, Liam became the official king of the flower shop floor. He was passed around like a precious, fragile bloom from one set of wrinkled, loving hands to the next. Mrs. Higgins held him against her chest, rocking him while humming an old lullaby, his little hands twitching in his sleep. Mr. Abernathy held him next, marveling at how small his fingers were compared to his own flower-dusted hands, while Nicholas stood firmly behind me, his large palm resting on the small of my back, his scent expanding to comfortably shield our son as he moved through the circle of elders. Watching this family we had built out of nothing but hope and a stubborn elderly woman's refusal to leave my shop, a deep, unshakable peace settled into my soul. I leaned my head back against Nicholas's broad shoulder, breathing in the scent of rain, cedar, and the sweet, milky fragrance of our son. I remembered the days when I used to stand in this very spot, sweeping the floors alone, speaking dreamily to the elders about a bond that didn't need negotiation, a love that felt like home. But as I looked at my mate, my son, and the beautiful chaos of the life we now shared, I knew the truth. There is no harm in waiting dreamily for a perfect life. Because sometimes, if you believe in it fiercely enough, reality doesn't just catch up to your dreams. It blooms right in front of you, far more beautiful